A great plan of action is not an easy thing to actually execute without asking some very important questions. The first is making sure after every practice and every game, we ask ourselves 3 of the most important questions we can ever ask ourselves, and we divide our answers to those questions based on the mental and the physical. Those 3 questions are, number 1, how do you feel about today's performance? List everything mental, everything physical. Very broad question. Question 2, if you could play the practice over, play the game over, what would you have done differently? List everything mental, everything physical. And just as important, question 3, if you could play the practice over, play the game over, what would you have done the same? List everything mental, everything physical. Now, out of these 3 questions, one of the most beautiful words in all of sports emerges. Starts with a T, and it's called trend. Trend. Most athletes aren't aware of what they did well and what they didn't do so well in practice number 1 versus practice 6 versus practice 10 versus practice 17 and game 4 versus game 7 versus game 12. They're unaware of those things. But actually taking the time to log these answers. At times it seems a little bit labor intensive or laborious or not much fun, but the results are fun in regards to being able to make important tweaks and corrections. The interesting thing about so many athletes in today's climate is there are some very, very motivated athletes out there in high school and collegiate ranks. But there are also so many athletes who don't really have a great sense of self-accountability and self-motivation. And this is a shame. So many of those athletes just sit back and they wait for coaches to make a slight adjustment after a practice or after a game. And the coaching staff, when you really think about it, they have so many hats to wear in terms of individual skill development and designing and scouting, designing great offense and great defense and scouting the opposition. And the list goes on. There's hardly a program in America where the coaching staff has the time to sit down with every single player every single time and give a full, in-depth, comprehensive critique on everything that went right and wrong in that practice relative to the mental or the physical. There has to be, for an athlete who cares about his or her career and cares about his or her team and cares about being great under pressure, there has to be a level of self-driven accountability. And asking those 3 questions is a great start.
Thinking back to all of the players, the great players that you've coached, Billy, and worked with, what 1 or 2 stand out in their area of commitment? And can you think about what made them special? Was it just their big game preparation? Was it just their approach to practice? Or was it the stuff they were doing outside of mandatory practice? Or was it a combination of some of those things?
Yeah,
Can you give a couple of examples?
I think it's a great question because I think there's a balance. There's a lot of times when we have a player that's been recruited and sometimes his past can really affect his mental approach. There's times where kids have been built up to think they're a lot better than they really are.
Yes.
And there's also been times where kids have been beaten down where they lack that self-confidence and self-esteem. I think the great players have an incredible balance. I think in order to be a terrific player, a terrific athlete, I say this all the time, there has to be self-reflection. So many times young players project out of what the problem is. Coach has not used me the right way.
Right.
My teammates are not passing me the ball. And they project out instead of really looking in the mirror to say, okay, what can I control and where do I need to get better? I think the great ones have a great ability to self-reflect. They beat themselves up a little bit, but they don't beat themselves up so much where they can't get out of it. And they also now have that commitment to get better.
Right.
You know, that to me is what the great ones do, is when they don't perform well, instead of projecting out and looking at everybody else being the problem, they look at themselves and say, okay, I didn't do this, and I didn't do this, and I'm disappointed I didn't do it.
Yes.
Now, how do I get back to playing where I need to play? And I often use this as an example. You know, a person has open heart surgery and has some health issues and gets a new heart, and person says, well, the reason I had open heart surgery is because I didn't drink enough water. And that's really not the problem. The problem is they maybe weren't eating well. So many young people don't identify what the problem is. And you cannot get better unless you identify the problem. And I do think that our mistakes can be incredible fertilizer for us to get better and to improve and to go on, provided you understand what the reason is. And I think as a coach, one of the most important things you can do is explain to the kids why they did not perform well. And a lot of times you'd be surprised at their answer. Their answer of why I don't think they perform well, through my experience, has nothing to do with that. But to get them to identify the problem, the great players I've coached, the Joe Kim Noahs, the Al Horfords, the Mike Millers, the Udonis Haslams, the Matt Bonners, guys that are won championships and are playing in the NBA, have had long careers, incredible self-evaluation, always internalizing what they can do better. And I think then there comes that, okay, when you have that kind of commitment, then you can then look into finding why is this not going right? Because if you keep addressing your mistakes the same way, you're going to get the same results.
Right.
You got to find out how to address your mistakes and pinpoint what the problem is so you can get better.